when you need money, you need to make sure that the co-GPs have a good handle on the LPs, because it's the LPs that are eventually bringing the money to the table with the GPs. Of course, GPs have to contribute their money, but the LPs traditionally are going to have the lion's share of that equity stack. And if you don't have a good handle on those LPs, you can run into some really hot water and not being able to raise your money.
I am Christina Suter, and this is the Real Estate Breakthrough Show, where we talk about the reality of real estate, the mindset you need in order to face the reality of what it is, and tips and tricks to get you moving forward in investing. I am your host, Christina Suter. So I have with me Chad Zdenek. How do I say it, Chad?
Pretty good. Zdenek.
Zdenek. I have Chad Zdenek with me, and Chad, I've known you for probably 5 years. Is it longer?
I think probably about 5 years. Yeah, it's been a while.
5 years. And it's been, I mean, you've been at my event. You invited me to one of your events. It's been wonderful being able to work together as professionals in the field. And I think you come up with a presentation that we've invited you to come give on the ITI stage in April 3rd. You're going to be there. And I interviewed you recently. For those of you who watch my show on a regular basis, you'll recognize that Chad's been on Real Estate Breakthrough relatively recently. But this topic I felt like was valuable enough. I even wanted to get it on the podcast as an individual topic. So we're really going to focus on that topic, which is how to select the right investment partners inside of real estate. And I'm glad that you're going to present this. You presented it at Hunter's Meeting, the capital raisers, and now you're going to present it at ITI. But Chad, let's give people a real quick understanding of your background and how you got into real estate.
Sure. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on. Super excited and glad to do it a second time around. So I started back in the 90s in construction, of all things. I was in construction management and getting my civil engineering degree. Eventually got my general contractor's license and got my professional engineer's license. I worked at Boeing for 7 years, actually on the space shuttle main engine, of all things. I was a structural dynamics engineer. And then I called myself a cubicle jockey back then. And then and then I went off on my own with my brother. We started a company, a lighting business. We started with just him and I and a couple workers, and then eventually built that up to 75 employees and 3 warehouse locations about 15 years later. And then he bought me out of that business, and I went I like to say back into real estate full time. So I've been doing that since about 2018. And so I focus on purchasing multifamily and self-storage properties in California, and also investing out of state. And I've got about $200 million under management currently.
So that's specifically in CSQ Properties.
Yes.
It's amazing. And you said it's multifamily as well as some storage units and other assets?
Just self-storage and multifamily.
Self-storage and multifamily. And I think what's so important, I think people need to understand, if I may, the size that you are. This is not like you're a brand new investor. Oh my gosh, I've never done this before. I've had 3 deals, right? I think people need to understand the amount of assets you guys have under management that you guys have worked on. I mean, how many complete cycles have you guys created?
Yeah, so it's about 750 units, multifamily units, and 3,000 self-storage units, or about 425,000 rentable square feet. And so far, we've had two projects go full cycle, but a fair amount of our stuff is buy and hold.
Yeah.
So we've had
Unfair
them
question
longer,
in
but
that way. Yeah.
yeah, we're just a buy and hold. So it kind of depends. It's a different investor for different types of properties, but I like to do a mix of the two.
No, it's lovely. Thank you for rounding that out, because the real purpose was I want people to understand, because we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so talking about what are the things, basically 4 areas where you find can be pitfalls inside of partnerships. And once you understand those pitfalls, how is that going to help you select the right investment partner in real estate, right? That's the whole topic. And I'm reason why I'm putting this together is because almost everybody I know that has invested in real estate longer than 6 years has a failing deal or a failing partnership. Almost everybody I know can talk to what is the lessons they learned in that. And Real Estate Breakthrough, this whole show has that as a question. Almost every single time I ask somebody, tell me about a deal that failed and tell me how you made it right. Because the success that we create in real estate isn't because, gee, the deal is successful. It is in the due diligence. That's true. That happens. And that's part of setting up the deal for success in the beginning. But it's what you don't know that you didn't know that's going to show up as a problem. And it's either in the deal or it's in the partnership. And I love that you've really taken the topic head on and gone, okay, guys, let's talk about partnership. We rarely talk about partnership in real estate. We spend a lot of time on due diligence on the deal. And that's why I'm like, I wanted you to come back on the show and specifically, let's talk about partnership. What have you found? What are the 4 points that you got that you think are important for people to know? And let's discuss that. So start off with point one. What are the one of the things that you see can be a pitfall for selecting the right investment partner?
Yeah, perfect. So let me give you some context, and I think this helps for people
Please.
with this analogy. A lot of us have heard about the horse track analogy, right? So the
Okay.
horse track itself is the market, the horse is the property, and the jockey is the operator or the sponsor, the people running the deal. And a lot of people focus a lot on the sponsor, right? They say, "Hey, you got to bet on the jockey," right? That's a common phrase in racing.
Yeah. Yep.
And in our industry, that's really important, right? To bet on the jockey or bet on the sponsor. But what I'm trying to bring to light is that there's actually a fourth player in the race, and this is specific to real estate. And the fourth player in the race are the stable caretakers. When the horse gets sick, who takes care of the horse? Those
Mm-hmm.
are the stable caretakers, which I refer to as the general partners or the LPs,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yep.
it's the co-GPs that are managing the LPs, right? Because when your horse gets sick or when you have a distressed property and you have to go through a capital call, which a lot of us have done,
Mm-hmm.
you need your LPs to step up. And
Mm-hmm.
the main way that they step up is via the co-GP or the fund-to-fund manager, depending on how the LLC is set up. But those are the people that you really need to rely on. And nobody's talked about those fourth player in the race until
No,
now. Like
nobody ever talks about the LPs. They talk about sometimes they
yeah,
talk about the GPs and how you can have a customer care relationship with them, but they're very, very, very rarely is there a direct conversation about the LPs, who they are, who you want, who you don't want. I mean, there's so much more in there. Sorry, Chad. I just
yeah,
wanted to
no,
join you on where you were talking. Go ahead.
exactly. So, and a lot of us have figured this out as we've gone through distressed deals. And I know you've seen your fair share of cycles and in the real estate market. And this is another one of those cycles that we're going through.
Hmm.
But one thing that you realize, like when the tides go out, you find out, who's not wearing the bathing suit, right? That
Yeah.
common phrase. So I've witnessed and learned firsthand through my partnerships the importance of really good co-GPs, whether it's in my deal that I'm sponsoring or another deal that I'm supporting. Either way, it's really critical. And so I've kind of identified four different areas where we can really hone in our skills or hone in what
Okay.
we're looking for in terms of co-GPs or partners
Okay. Okay. We're
to
gonna talk
make
about
sure.
code keys. I see. I don't know your 4 points, Chad. So I don't know if it's code GPs or LPs or all the above. I'm still catching up.
Well, so that's a good point. So let's just say like when you're going through a capital call and you basically the whole equity stack needs to bring money to the table. That means the GPs, the co-GPs, and the LPs, right? And just to make it clear for everyone, from a semantic standpoint, the GPs would be like the sponsors, the general partners, the sponsors. Your co-GPs or your capital raisers, your investor relations people, your asset management people, like those are the co-GPs. They usually bring money to the table in terms of LPs or limited partners. So those kind of make up the equity stack, if you will. And when you need money, you need to make sure that the co-GPs have a good handle on the LPs because it's the LPs that are eventually bringing the money to the table with the GPs, of course. GPs have to contribute their money, but the LPs traditionally are going to have the lion's share of that equity stack. And if you don't have a good handle on those LPs, you can run into some really hot water and not being able to raise your money.
Good description. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
You
let's
do you
dive.
do really need that. I mean, well, Nothing. Go ahead. I
Yeah.
was going to go into another story, but we don't need the story. What we need is what you have to say. Go ahead,
All
Chad.
right. So this is like firsthand experience. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
from other people what they've seen.
Yeah.
For the people that listen to your show, like what have you guys seen? Because these are just from my experiences. But so one of the areas, and all of this is from this point on is going to be focused on the co-GP. This is the leader in the group that is bringing a pool of money to the table via their investors. Right? It's very common. Um, a common setup in syndication. Obviously, they're going to be doing a lot more than capital raising. They're going to be doing some asset management, some investor relations, maybe property management, underwriting. There's a bunch of other stuff that they do, but for this conversation, we're going to focus on the investor side of it with the LPs. So the first thing is that you want to make sure that they aren't making any broken promises to their LPs. And where this becomes an issue is, like, let's say there's a hurdle rate that you have in the deal, and they're neglecting that there's a hurdle rate, meaning like, okay, above 15% annualized return, we're going to go to like a 50-50 split instead of 70-30. So they might neglect to say that, right? Or they might forget to say that there's an interest rate cap on the deal, but not tell you that it floats or that it's going to be an adjustable interest rate cap, right? And these things, like, if there's no problem on the deal, then it doesn't usually become an issue. But when there is an issue, that's where these things come to light. And if you have a co-GP that has said these broken promises, either by just conversations, phone conversations, meetings, email, text, whatever, then that becomes a big problem. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a legal problem, right? Because everything's spelled out in the PPM, and you say, okay, this is what you need to pay attention to, blah, blah, blah. It's a 150-page document that you sign. All the legalese is in there, right? So you might be able to argue that legally you might be covered. Like, oh, on page 67, it said that it's a floating rate caps. Sorry, I didn't tell you that, but that's what it says in there. Like, okay, that's fine, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to either A, complain about it, B, not be happy or invest with you, C, try to get legal counsel and make an argument against you, or D, make file an SEC complaint against you and the whole entity. Like, there's a bunch of other things that can happen, and there's basically two people in the world: people that have been sued and people that haven't been sued yet. Right? So people can sue you for anything, and
Hmm.
it's going to cause you a lot of heartache to go through that. So even if the broken promise could be proven in court that you didn't technically break a promise because of the 150-page PPM, that doesn't mean that it's not going to cause you a lot of problems. And so that's why it's really important. So that's number one.
Okay.
We
I
good
love
with
that.
number one?
Number one's great. So let me recap it. So you want your co-GP to be clear and accurate about what are some of the details, the technicals of the deal. And I would assume it's almost like, hey, here are the 15 things or 10 things that we specifically need the co-GP to tell our investors, which you wouldn't, if you've never been a GP in a deal and you haven't raised a lot of capital, or you've never seen a deal go wrong, you wouldn't be busy going, okay, they need to know about the floating rate. Okay, we need to double check that they know about the ceiling and at what point the waterfall changes. Like, I don't know that you would have in an early deal been so specific about, here is exactly the terms that the investors need to know, so that when they sign that document, these are the things that are embedded in it that could, if the deal fell apart, could be at question or could become very important all of a sudden. Now, I read all 150 pages. I'm that geek, I'm that nerd, and I get paid by my investment clients, by my real estate investment clients, specifically to read the 150 pages. So I'm busy calling out the technicals in that document to my clients, whether or not the co GP has called them out, because those are the things that stand out to me as either useful or red flags, right? Like a
Yep.
floating rate can be a red flag. A waterfall that works for you is a 50-50 up to a certain percentage of return, let's say 15%. And over, once the LPs receive 15% above that, the split turns into from 70-30 to 50-50. I'm like, hey, you're probably going to get 15%, or more because they're calling it out. They're anticipating they're going to make it because at that point, that's when the general partnership gets more money back. So good news. Woohoo. Right? So that can be a positive indicator inside of the PPM or the LLC agreement. But you're saying that co-GP, if they're not calling that out, that's can become a liability.
Yeah. It's even as simple as saying, "Hey, we're going to exit in 5 years," right? Like, okay, what if it's 6 years or what if it's 4 years, right? But no, no, no. You told me it was going to be 5 years.
Right.
Like something as subtle as that, and
Yeah.
setting expectations from the beginning can cause problems down the road. When, like, let's say 5 years comes, hey, I need my money. You said we are out in 5 years, and you should never make concrete predictions
Mhm.
like that, because you don't know when you're actually going to be able to exit some of these deals, and so it could be something like that that gets you honked up.
Yeah, I mean, just as simple as the plan is to, and
Yep.
conditions might change
Yep.
versus we're exiting in 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. So, in private equity, you're right. Is there private equity in the deal or not? And some of these, the details of like a private equity play, which is a big part of the capital stack, can change as the deal's moving through the process, like before it closes.
That's a good
And
point.
if you don't know what the deals of the private equity are, that could also be a big problem. So, you really want to make sure that the co-GP, they have to be humble enough to where if they don't know the answer, that they say, "Great question, Mrs. Investor. Let me get back to you. Let me find out. I'll get back to you." Right? Like
Right.
you got to be able to say something like that instead of just guessing it and thinking, "Oh, I'm just gonna sweep it under the rug. It doesn't matter,"
Close
because
enough.
it could matter and it might come back to bite you.
Okay. Beautiful. Got it. Point
Cool.
1. Point
So
2.
that's number one. So number two, what I call the silent co-GP, and so this is like the partner that again that you don't want to be in the deal with, is somebody who doesn't communicate well with their investors. Again, you might need to lean on those investors at some point, and particularly through a capital call. And if you have a co-GP who doesn't communicate very well with those investors, then that could be a big problem for you. And you might think like, oh, it's not me, it's them. It's their investors. Their investors aren't going to invest again with
Mhm.
them. It's like, well, it could very well come back to bite you if those investors become unhappy because they don't know what's going on. So I like to always say that you have like top down communications at a minimum. So the sponsor will have like the monthly reporting that goes out to everybody, and then the co-GPs can add to that if they want. But there's got to be like a minimum threshold of communication, like written communication, and then there should also be an understanding that if questions come up or investors have issues, like you need to get back to the investor. And if for some reason you can't, you're too busy, well, okay, lean on your team, ask for a favor. And usually a GP will be willing to do this, to where, yeah, have your investor call me, I'll talk them through it. Because
Yeah.
it's not like we're trying to hide something, or what you tell your investor should be different than my investor. It's the same deal. It's
Right.
just me having to do a little bit of work to hop on the phone with your investor. But that is a lot better than being silent about it and leaving the investor in the dark.
It's such a great description, and I just wanna add to that because, again, since I meet with people and I hear feedback from my clients about, "Well, wait a minute, I invested in this deal, how's it going? Haven't a clue. Haven't heard from them for 2 years. Not right, I don't know what's going. I gave them the money." It's and there's this sort of set it and forget it, right? And then all of a sudden you hear from the investor, and it could be good news or bad news, right? This is listening to my clients. It is, hey, guess what? We're selling early, and my investor's pissed. This is the first piece of information I received from you is that you're now selling early. I have no idea why. I don't understand what's happened. I don't know what's going on. And all of a sudden I get what might be a piece of good news, might be a piece of bad news, and I'm not happy about it. Either I'm unhappy with the lack of clarity or I'm happy with the fact that you basically startled me and told me, "Guess what? We're in escrow." Like, "Wait a minute, you mean I'm getting my money back in 30 days? I haven't prepared where to put it next." So I'm just saying there are even complaints on the positive side when there is a vacuum, when there is a lack of communication. Or just to support your point, or I had a client who had a capital call show up and it was like, "What's going on with the deal?" And they're like, "I have no idea. I got this email and they're telling me they're doing a capital call and they're doing a webinar in 2 weeks and I am freaked." This is the first piece of communication I have gotten from these people. I do not know if I can trust them. I do not know what they've been up to. And I don't know that they have my back because they haven't communicated with me for 2 years. So,
Yeah.
what I'm left with as an investor is being suspicious in the void.
Yeah. It's a big problem.
And it's a problem, right? So, if you want to have reoccurring investors, like you talked about, the silent co GP is going to lead to inherent difficulties, even if you have positive news.
Yeah.
You're going to have inherent difficulties when news goes out.
Yeah. If you're not communicating with them, they'll make up their own story in their head about what's going on with the deal, and it's not going to be the reality. It'll either be more positive or less positive, but it's not going to be
It's
reality.
not going to be reality. And I literally have had people who are like, when they do like interviews with other investors who are in the deal already and they want to interview, they're like, or like, I had one client who walked up to the GP and she's like, I don't think the GP even knew that I was invested in his deal. I don't think he has a clue. I made sure I gave him my name, but it's like 3 minutes later, I'm still talking to him. I'm like, I don't think he even knows I'm in his deal.
Yeah.
And he hasn't talked to me. And literally clients going, if they it's become some of my clients have it on their list. If they do not communicate, and I'm told they don't communicate, I will not invest in the deal, even if they have several successful closes. I will choose to not invest because they do not treat their investors, and it's not necessarily the GP, it's the co-GP is
Yeah.
not treating their investors with the respect of staying in communication. So I'm just saying, do investors notice? Yeah. Yes, the investors notice. I'm just coming at it from the investor side.
Yeah. Absolutely. It makes a big difference. So the next two are a lot more difficult to avoid ahead of time. We
Okay.
talked about like how do you really pick partners, what to look for in partners. So the next two really deal with like partner or facilitating a partner relationship, right? And not just like once you close escrow, you're done with it. So the third issue is like with what I call the lone wolf co-GP.
Okay.
And this is the co-GP where things, let's say things are, there's bumps in the road, which there usually is, and they try to distance themselves from the rest of the team. So saying that,
Yeah.
they intentionally say, oh, well, they want to go and do it this way, but I thought we should do this, right? And they're the notorious like Monday morning quarterback, right? So they always say,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I told them they shouldn't have done that, but they did instead, and now here we are. And so it's really the person that is off on their own,
Yeah.
and they try to talk badly about the team to make themselves look good, which
Mhm.
really doesn't do anybody any favors.
Mhm.
And so one of the ways to kind of avoid this is the sponsors or GPs on the deal, like they need to treat the co-GPs like as part of the team, right? Like you,
Mhm.
you need to be talking to them, treat them as if they're an investor because they really are, right? They're helping to bring a bunch of money to the table. You need to have regular outreach to them so that they're included in the team. Because like we just said on the previous point, if there's lack of communication there, they're going to make up their own story in their head. And it's definitely going to be wrong. We just don't know which side of wrong it's going to be, but
Yeah.
it's not going to be accurate because they're just filling in the void. So instead, it behooves a sponsor to make sure that they keep a good relationship up with the co-GPs so that you don't end up having this lone wolf situation. And then once they start talking to their investors, and now the investors are thinking the same thing as this lone wolf co-GP, if you need money, that entire group is off the table. You can consider
Yeah.
them gone. They're not going to invest in you because or the property because that would be an investment in you and they're already not on the same page as you and it's a big problem.
It's a really good description, and it does it intentionally. I know those code GPs, and I've heard them talking. I have. I've been in real estate meetings, and they'll,
uh,
oh well, I was involved in this deal, and the general partner, well, he just made this sort of fatal mistake, and now the deal's falling apart, and I'm like, wow, okay, got it. You threw him under the bus or her
yeah.
under the bus, right?
And a
And
lot of
yeah,
times, sorry, Christine, a lot of times, if that co-GP was involved, like the 6 months ago or whenever that decision was made, if they were involved and knew what was going on right there, 8 times out of 10, they would have made the same decision as the team, right?
yeah,
Because I
that's
mean,
correct.
in general, we're all pretty smart people. You invest with people experience, right? Like you make the best decision you can with the information you have at hand. It's never 100%, never, right? And if that person's involved the whole time, then they can see your thought process, and they would most of the time agree with it, right? But when you look at it in hindsight, everything's clear in hindsight, and that's not giving the team the
Yeah.
benefit of the doubt when you do that to them.
It isn't. It isn't giving the team the benefit of the doubt, and it is, to me, not taking accountability for your investors. I think that's what the investors aren't sensitive to. When they throw the GP under the bus and say, "Well, they made a decision." Right? Like, let's go back. I'm going to make my point, and then we go back to your point. They say they made a decision and they've messed it up. You've lost all those investors, but the investors should consider that a bit of a red flag because they're literally not taking accountability for the fact that they've placed you in a deal that they're now lone wolfing on.
Yep. Yeah,
Like, are you
exactly.
going to protect my money? Are you going to be an active, engaged partner in this process? Are you going to be tracking the deal after I funded it? Because if they're doing lone wolf on from the investor's point of view, right? From the you're now not protecting me as an investor because you're not connected to the deal anymore,
Yeah,
right? So I keep trying to bring that in from like because that's obviously my side, right? And it sets it up so that the GP can't raise money when there's a need to raise money or when there's a sudden change, good news or bad news, because now those investors are not connected to the deal. And your solution is, well, you make sure that those co-GPs show up to regular meetings so that they are included in the deal. You're role modeling the effect, the level of care and communication you expect them to forward to their own LPs. You're giving to them.
absolutely. Yeah, that's critical. You got to treat them as if they were like one of your biggest investors because they really are. Let's say they brought
Yeah.
500K or $1 million to the deal, right? They're a large investor and you should treat them like that. A lot of people they think of it totally separate. They think of like, okay, if I have a 500K investor, right? I'm gonna really stay on top of it. I'm gonna clear communication. I'm gonna buy them, take them out to dinner, whatever it is, call them when I'm in town. Like you do all these things for your big investor, but then on a co-GP, they bring 500K to the table, and there's not that same level of respect or appreciation that you would have for a large investor.
Mhm.
And I'm just saying, just do the same thing that you would do. And I think most of the problems would go away if you treated them as if they were a large investor.
Beautiful. Love
Yeah.
it.
So the last one is really where the rubber meets the road. And like I said, a lot of this stuff is hidden until you have a distressed deal and then this stuff starts popping up in bad places. So where the rubber meets the road on a distressed deal is when you have a capital call
Yeah.
and you're trying to get the LPs to come to the table. And so this fourth issue is what I call the futile capital call raise co-GP.
Yes.
So basically, like let's say everyone needs to come to the table with 25% more. You've got your one investor that brought $1 million to begin with. Well, now you're hoping that they would bring 250K to the table, right?
Yeah.
But if they're in any of these issues and that they're popping up, well, guess what? That 250K is going to be 100K or 50K or worst case scenario zero, right?
Yeah.
I've been in deals, capital call deals, where I brought 80% of my investors came on board for what they needed to bring. I didn't get 100, I got 80, right? I had two others on this particular example that brought zero, right?
Wow.
So how do I bring 80% of the capital call money to the table that I need to and
Yeah.
they bring zero? It's the
Yeah,
same
because it's the
deal.
same deal.
There's
Exactly.
nothing
It's the same
special
deal.
about
It's the same solution. It's the same webinar. It's
it.
the same. Everything else should effectively be the same. The emails are the
Yes.
same. The communication's the same. It's the personalized conversation that is the difference.
Yeah, it's how is that co-GP managing their people through this issue? And even taking a step further, like there's nothing special about my investors, right? I've got some business owners, I've got some retired folks, I've got some W2 people.
Okay.
It's a mix, just like everybody else. So and some family, but when you have 0 versus 80, to me that's where the flags started going off. I'm
Oh
like,
yeah, that's
whoa, there's
straight
something
up.
off here. So that's where the rubber meets the road is when they need to bring money to the table and it doesn't happen. That's where you see it. I had another deal just to give you one more quick example, and we had to bring. This was like a 30% capital raise. So if you put in 100K, you got to come up with another 30,
Mhm.
right? And I brought 80 or 85%. I think I brought 80% to that one, and the average of all the other co-GPs was 20%.
Right.
And it's like you said, it's the same team, it's the same property, it's the same market, it's the same time. Everything's the same. So how am I bringing 80% to the table, and the average of everyone else is 20%? It's a disaster. And it did happen. That capital call failed, and then we had to go through a whole different issue with the recapitalization group. It's not very good.
No, it's not very good. What do you think was the difference, Chad?
I think it's these issues I'm talking about.
Okay.
You're having a co-GP that's not communicating well. You might
Right.
have a co-GP that made broken promises to begin with. You got
Okay.
someone who's distancing themselves from the group and saying, "Oh, they're doing this when we really should have been doing that." And
Right.
then push came to shove, they brought 20% to the table.
Because to me, again, right, being on the investor side, right? I'm sorry, I didn't realize that this conversation would be so this direction, but it's good in my mind. Because I've been a passive investor in many syndication deals. I represent clients that invest passively in syndication deals. I encourage it in my consulting practice that people invest in passively in syndication deals. So I've been involved on the investor side in these capital calls, having conversations with my investor, and they always call me at the very first email. They call me and go, "Christina, I just got this email. They're doing a capital call. What do you think? Should I give them more money?" Like, literally, like, boom, boom, boom. And I'm always like, well, maybe I need a little more information than that
Yeah,
before I
yeah.
can answer that question.
You're good, but you're not that good, right?
I'm good, but I don't have I don't have ESP or a crystal ball, right? Like, it's like,
Yeah,
so then I go, okay, so like Lily just got a call 2 days ago from actually yesterday from a client saying so and so is doing a capital call. Christina, should I reinvest? Well, I need more information. When's the webinar? Right? Because without the plan, I have no idea if it's really going to be successful or not. So you got to go to the webinar in order to get the plan. And then when you go to the webinar to get the plan, that's the moment where you can reestablish the trust with the investor that it's clear, it's concise, it works financially, but it also works as far as the sort of like emotional mental realm. Like, you're not busy going, well, the bank screwed us and did it to us, so therefore it's hey, this is what happened. This is why it got called. This is why the loan isn't performing. This is why, so there's a whole series in that webinar and in those follow-up phone calls that's about reestablishing know, like, and trust.
yeah,
And if you can reestablish know, like, and trust and have a sound plan, then you're probably going to get the money. But if you don't establish know, like, and trust, the plan itself will not look sound. And I know because I've worked with investors where I'm like, no, no, it's a sound plan. And they're like, yeah, but I don't know, like, and trust anymore.
yeah. Yeah, the only other thing I'd add to that is
Please.
the trust piece. Like, if you start to erode trust over the course of that deal, and then,
Yeah.
oh, now we're gonna do a capital call and trust me again. Like you can't do that. You have to continually be building on that trust for the whole time. And I think communication is a key component of that, to make sure that you can trust the team and you know what they're doing. Because if you knew, like going back to my example of making a
Mhm.
decision 6 months ago, and I've said 8 times out of 10 that, and it could be even, it's probably actually higher than that, but whatever. Most of the time, if you knew the information at the time, you would have made the same decision. The LPs are the same way, right?
Yeah.
If they know what's going on at the beginning or 6 months ago in this example, and they knew the decision you made there, most of the time they would be on board also. And then things happen. You find out what the market does and what the Fed does and all this other external
Mhm.
stuff that you have no control over affects the decisions you made 6 months ago. Well, they were along for the ride and they kind of knew what was going on. You kept them up to date, and that's where trust is created. I'm not asking for trust, the month that we need extra money, because that's too late if you're asking for trust
Right.
at that point.
It is too late. And it is like, let's you hit on something that isn't in your 5 points, but I like to unpack it a little bit if we could. Right. One of the things that you hit on was it really is when the water goes out, quote unquote, you know who is wearing swimming trunks or not, right? Who's dressed or
Yep.
not, right? But at the same time, it's like you got to understand, especially in this last cycle, the interest rates going up as aggressively as they did was not a planned for event. So I can't tell you how many times I've heard me say, and I stole this from Neil Bawa, It's not the deal that was having the problem. It's the financing. The deal worked. Buy units, rehab them, value add, re-rent them, right? You increase the value of the building. The building itself is going to work and it's going to be worth more if the cap rate is staying relatively stable in the market you're working in. So the
Yep.
deal itself and the trajectory of the deal is working. It is the financing that goes offline in
Yeah.
this last cycle, right? And it was kind of the same was true in 2007, 8, and 9, right? Was the financing went offline. Like I was in the middle of a couple deals of my own, and I literally had my financing called on me. I couldn't get my construction loan. I couldn't finish my rehab, right? Because they literally called the line they had promised me. They said, "Sorry, you haven't drawn on it yet. We're closing the line." I'm like, well, okay. So I'm
Yeah.
not finishing that project, right? So I sold that project at a loss. Thank God I was the only investor in that one, right? It was just me with myself. It was a small project, right? But I had a condo conversion that was going on as well. That was a larger project, right? Same time period. So I guess what's important and what is hard to explain to an investor unless you have their trust is the deal really is working. It really isn't us. Because every investor is going to want to say, what did they do wrong?
Yeah.
How did they mess up? And that is directed straight at the GPs. The assumption from the beginning is they messed up. You guys messed up. And if you don't have the trust, it's very hard to be able to call it out and say, this was fine, this was fine, this was fine, this was fine, this was fine. It really was the market. Because there are deals that fail because the GP messed up. That's true. We're not saying that isn't the case, right? But if you don't have either an experienced investor who can sort that out in their own thinking, which I can because I've been investing for so long, or you have no trust with the partner anymore, then even I will get suspicious and
Yeah.
go, really? So you're telling me you put money in the deal? Like I have one deal. We put 150,000 in the deal between me and my husband, right? And we get no communication, right? Well, no, we had one letter. Sorry, the subflooring is going to cost more than we thought. That was
Yeah.
the letter we got.
Uh,
That was the first shot across the bow. And it's like, huh,
it's
okay. And
brutal.
then 6 months later, we're getting, by the way, we now need more cash.
Yeah.
Oh, and then it was, I've put money in the deal to sustain the deal. So now we have to do a capital call. And at the end of the day, we went, wait a minute. You put more money in the deal. Now we got a phone call. We don't know what's going on. We try to ask questions. We sell the deal. By the way, we don't know. The deal closes. We find out that his loan was repaid, but the investors lost all their equity because his contribution to save the deal was a loan and not more equity. So his loan to
Mhm.
float the deal was repaid at the close of escrow, but we as investors were not.
Yeah.
Guess what? Lawsuit. How did you get your money out of the deal and we didn't?
Yeah.
Because that's what we were left with. Now, if there was more details than that, which there probably was, and later he's like, I lost equity too. I lost $2 million worth of equity in that deal. Blah, blah. Like later there was a conversation about it, but because there was no prep work, no communication, no updating, no, here I'm putting money into the deal. Here's the money I'm putting into the deal. Just need you to understand this is how, like, there was no consistency. It absolutely led to a lawsuit where we're like, you GP messed up and we're suing you. So I'm
Yeah.
just saying that's the type of environment that can be created through the lack of communication, right? And if a GP, the lack of being able to have a conversation about, well, the GP did something, or we did do something, or we didn't do something. We did do something, here's how we're fixing it. We didn't do something, here's how we're fixing it.
Yeah. That's
Just
a really good example. Like what I was getting at before, whether you're wrong or right, and if it goes to a lawsuit, like he's got to pay to defend himself, right? Let's say in that example went through and okay, he did lose all of his equity before you guys, and he did some sort of member loan to be above that capital stack, and it was all above board. Like that very well could have been the case, but when you hire a lawyer and then he's got to hire a lawyer and then you start arguing about it, the lawyers are the only ones that win. And and that's the problem with lack of communication is if it ends up going the legal route, even if you're technically right by whatever measures those are legally.
That's right. Technically, he was right. He put more money in the deal as a loan, which was
Yeah.
above the equity partners. Yeah, go ahead.
So, but he had to spend money to kind of prove that point. Whereas if
He
he
did.
would have communicated it up front and you guys understood it, it probably would have gone a different way.
Yeah, and it again, it's. I just so appreciate this conversation, Chad. I really do. I so appreciate it because it's. I've sat in the investor seat. You've sat in the GP seat. We've been on both. Both of us have been on the end of a deal that isn't working. And what is the difference between having a deal that isn't working? Another example. I did a hard money loan against a flip. I was 2 months out from the money being due. I got an email from the guy I lent the money to. He's like, "Hey, guess what? We're not gonna sell by the time the note needs to renew. By the way, it's probably gonna sell as a loss. So here's my plan." Because you're like, "Wait a minute, the property I invested in that I'm securitized against going to sell at a loss." Like, oh my gosh, right?
Yeah.
He's like, "But here's my plan, and my plan is to," and I'm like, "Oh." His plan had me as the investor included in the plan. Here's how we're going to keep you safe.
Yeah.
Here's how we're going to, blah, blah, blah. And in this case, it was moving me from paying on me off in part and moving the remainder to another project. Right. So I could keep my know, like, and trust in place with him. And I funded more deals with him. How
Yeah.
would I not fund more deals with him? Even though that deal, quote unquote, failed, even though
Yeah.
he lost money on the deal, even though, quote, like all these things where I could have been suspicious, I was left with being engaged, knowing and trusting him even more deeply because his plan clearly had me protected in it. So just another story,
Love that. Yeah, that's a great
right?
story. It's a common thing in business. Like you talk about some of the best customers you have are the ones where things went wrong with and you were able to fix it. Because then that's really you talk about trust. That really establishes a trust. Like things went sideways and
Yeah.
you fixed it and you made it right. Like
Yeah.
I'm really going to trust you because of what we already went through. It doesn't have to be all sunshine and rainbows, right? There's going to be problems, but
Yeah.
if you can perform well during those problems, your trust is going to go through the roof.
That's gonna go through. And so I just so appreciate the four properties or the four types or four traits that you've just brought forward and being able to say, look, this is how you keep this intact.
Yep.
Because every cycle, there are deals that fail. Every cycle, as an investor, every cycle. So every 8 to 10 to 15 years, I'm going to get a series of deals that are going to fail. Not because it's so much because I made a bad decision or not so much because the GP made a bad decision, but because the cycle creates fail points in deals.
Yeah, I agree.
This last cycle to me was a perfect example of the interest rates going up so aggressively, creating a fail point in deals that was not a fail point in the last 6 to 8 years previous to that.
Yeah.
So, all right, Chad. Oh, it is time. We are out of time. So, Chad, if people want to get a hold of you, they want to invest in one of your deals because now they understand the care that you're putting forward to protect your investors. How do they do that?
Yeah, so if you can follow us at anywhere social media is at CSQ Properties, like Challenge Status Quo. And then if they're interested in learning more about deals, you can go to csqproperties.com and we have a passive investor club, a button that they can click and join our list, and we'll keep you updated on what we're doing.
Oh, I love that. That's great. You can join their list and that way they can get the emails on what you guys are up to. All right. Thank you, Chad. I so appreciate it. This is Christina Suter with Real Estate Breakthrough, your real estate investment advisor, helping you fulfill your purpose through your real estate investment portfolio. Tune in another week. You'll find another show. Thank you so much.